Jag ska nu presentera vår gäst, tänkte jag, Ohad. Och Ohad har arbetat på många olika tv-kanaler, olika medier i Israel. Channel 1, Channel 10 och nu Channel 2. Så han hoppar mellan massa olika kanaler. Och jag la ut på Facebook i morse att det här eventet streamas. Man kan alltså sitta hemma och se detta om man nu inte fick biljett hit. Så därför också ett särskilt tack till Lawrence Berger som hjälper oss med detta. Helt ideellt. Streama detta live och det kommer också kunna gå att se i efterhand på hans hemsida. Jag återkommer med det senare. Jag la i alla fall ut den länken i morse. Det var det en som kommenterade, en svensk judinna som har gått på Aliyah och bor i Israel. Och så skriver hon, jag önskar att jag var i Sverige och lyssnade på Ohad. Det här är en journalist som jag följer hela tiden. Han är väldigt initierad och kunnig. Och framförallt just om det palestinska samhället, alltså palestinska ledarskapet, palestinska medier och vanliga palestinier på gatan, hur de upplever sin situation och sitt liv. Så att jag tror att om vi får den signalen från någon i Israel så tror jag vi kan vara ganska nöjda med vårt val av talare. Så med de orden, very welcome. I tried to say something nice, I don't know. No. Can't always manage, but I try.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really hope that Ove said good things about me, because my Swedish is not as good as, other languages. Shalom, hello. Great to be here today. I'm very honored and pleased and happy to be here today talking to you. As you've heard, my name is Ohad Hemo. I'm a correspondent for the Israeli Channel 2 TV, which is the biggest TV in Israel, the most viewed TV in Israel, covering the Arab world and specifically the Palestinian issues for 14 years, which is quite a long time. I started my career, to tell you the truth, 14 years ago in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. These days, I'm working only in the West Bank. Studied my first degree was archaeology and political science in Tel Aviv University. My second degree in Middle East Studies in the Hebrew University. I graduated in 2010, and to tell you the truth, ladies and gentlemen, don't take me literally, but I wanted to knock on the door and to ask for the money back. Why? Because it was so boring, so boring. Same regimes, same rulers, same countries for dozens of years. Nothing has changed in the Middle East. And then comes this young boy in 2010 called Mohammed Bouazizi from Tunisia, burning himself to death and creating this earthquake that its influence we feel until today, not only in Israel or in the Middle East, not only in Europe, but actually all over the world. I think that in a way, the Middle East is exporting himself to Europe and other places since that day. If we look today at the map of the Middle East, we're going to find out that it's irrelevant. There are 4 countries at least that does not exist. Each one of it divided to 2 or more entities. Do you know which countries, by the way? Syria, of course. Iraq, of course. Thank you very much. Libya, right? And the last one? Yemen. Great. That's right. And let's, with your permission, make a quick brief over the Israeli boundaries. Do you know these good guys? ISIS. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in post-ISIS world. This is the truth. No more ISIS for you. It's done. It's behind us. In a way, I think that the innovation of ISIS was the fact that for the first time of the modern history, we're talking about an organization, terror organization, that runs a country. And it runs it quite good, to tell you the truth. In its peak, ISIS caliphate was as big as Great Britain. We're talking about 9.6 million people that used to live under ISIS rule. We're talking about annual budget of $2 billion. And then ISIS figured out that you cannot fight the whole world. And they started to decline. The only place The only place in the Middle East today that there is ISIS, it is flourishing, it is growing, they've got prosperity, is here, next to the Israeli border in Sinai. You're talking about a place that today, or until recently, you had approximately 1,000 ISIS members. Today, much more, because lots of ISIS members are escaping from the caliphate that used to be the caliphate in Iraq and Syria, and they're finding a shelter here in northern Sinai. In a way, I think that Israel's luck is the fact that ISIS agenda is not Israel, but the Egyptians, Egyptian army, 25,000 people that cannot deal with them. But they all know that Israel helps the Egyptian fighting ISIS, bombing them in northern Sinai, so maybe this can be changed as well. I think that this is the story of the Middle East. Let's go to the longest border of Israel, Jordan, Exodus. This is the story. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see here is the third biggest city in Jordan. Do you know it? It's a refugee camp, exactly. Refugee camp called Zaatari. I've been there. Zaatari. And what we see today is millions of people that are moving from here to there, specifically mostly from Syria and Afghanistan. So these countries perceived huge numbers. Lebanon, 2 million Syrian refugees. Jordan, 1.4. Turkey, 3 million refugees, and so on. And this is the gate, of course. This is the gate to Europe. And it's a problem that the Middle East deals with. The Israeli-Syrian border is a 55 kilometers of border. Today, March 2018, only 10 kilometers out of these 55 are controlled by Bashar al-Assad and its allies, Hezbollah and Iran. All the rest is controlled by the rebels, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I said that there isn't any ISIS, but ironically, the only places, places that ISIS is still controlling is next to the Israeli border. They're enjoying the Israeli umbrella, in a way, because the Syrian regime is afraid getting close there. Just a few months ago, I've done this, sorry to say, interesting report. I joined the Israeli force in the southern Golan Heights. We went there 3 o'clock in the morning, and in a kind of irrational act, they opened the border to an enemy state. And from the border, you can see above me, from the border, there were 21 women with their children that entered Israel in order to get this health treatment. It happens on a weekly basis. 21 women with the children entering into Israel, to the hospital to get a treatment. I was walking there, working, made some interviews, and then one of the women whispered me, "Go to that woman, she has a good story." So I went to her, we'll see her, this girl, and we were starting to talk, and she told me that in a few hours from now, in 4, 5, 6 hours from now, she's going back to a village in southern Golan Heights, in the Syrian part, and this village is controlled by ISIS, still. She's going back to ISIS. I asked her, what's the reality there? Describe me. And she told me, you know, ISIS conquered her village 2.5 years ago. What do you think was the first thing that they've done there? Don't be too graphic or pornographic. But what they did was to burn all the textbooks. No more schools. 2.5 years, her children living in the house. And then she told me all the stories about what happens there. Each month there's an obligation. They have to go to the big mosque in order to see executions. You know, if you were stealing something, so your hand is going to be cut. If you're smoking cigarettes, so they cut your fingers, and so on and so on. So you're talking about a caliphate, the 7th century caliphate, that is rising in front of our eyes in the 21st century. And it's not far from the Israeli border, just kilometers. If I would have told you a few years ago that there are going to be ISIS or Al-Qaeda members, and they're going to sit 100 meters kilometer out of the IDF soldiers, and it's going to be the most quiet border of Israel. You would have laughed, and rightly so, but this is the truth. This is what happens. And in order to understand exactly what happens next to the Israeli border there, I had to come to Germany. I've done this series of reports about the Islam in Europe, and I went to Germany. It was a few months ago. I went to a place called in Berlin, to a neighborhood in Berlin, and I met a guy, Neukölln neighborhood, and I met a guy that used to be Al-Qaeda member for 10 years. Started his terror career in 2005, Syrian guy. He went to Iraq, he met Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the great founder of ISIS. Then he came back to Syria, located himself next to the Israeli border, and waited. And then the uprising started. 10 years of terror. Unbelievable story. And I met this guy in Germany. We were talking. I made an interview with him. He's got a great story. He started as a member of Al-Qaeda, just normal warrior, and then he became a cleric. And he told me that during the years, he sentenced lots of people to death because they weren't Muslims. He said that he's done just great crimes. And after 10 years, he said to himself, I cannot deal with this. The Islam that I know is a Damawi, he said. In Arabic, Damawi means bloody Islam. And I or commit suicide or I convert. So he converted to Christianity. By the way, he managed to penetrate Europe in 2015 during the big wave of refugees. It tells us something about what happens, I think, here in Europe. He's from Al-Qaeda, his brother is from ISIS, they live in Germany. The intelligence forces, the local intelligence forces does not know anything about the background of these people. It's unbelievable. 99% of the interviews that I make, I always know what's the motivation, what's the interest of the guy who's standing in front of me. Not here, I couldn't understand. He's talking, he's telling, and I cannot understand what does he want to achieve from this thing. So after we finished everything, I asked him, so what's the reason for you to talk? And I show you this. We had like a small chat while my cameraman is filming. Look what he said.
أحلم إني أتواصل مع إسرائيليين رحت لهم أيام التنظيم جيت إجازة على تركيا رحت على السفارة ما استقبلوني.
اقعد يا مشيخ ما استقبلوك.
ليه؟ لأنه ما عندي لغة. إيه رحت على باب السفارة أساعدهم بالعمل الأمني داخل سوريا هذا كثير أنا قوي فيه. العمل الأمني كمقرات سرية كسجون كمقرات الأمراء الكبار.
Did you understand what happens here? He was trying to recruit the Mossad. He was trying to help Israel. Of course, I tried to help him. He didn't. Israel didn't want his cooperation, so this is the reason for me to show this. But it's interesting. My job let me, or make some very interesting meetings like this. I told you that I made this series of reports about the Islam here, and what I found is quite frightening, some would say terrifying reality. There's a guy in Brussels called Ismail Saidi. Do you know him? He's a very unique and interesting voice, Muslim guy that was born in Molenbeek. You know Molenbeek, the neighborhood, the ghetto, call it whatever you want. So he's a Muslim from there. He was born there. And he said, he made a play, he wrote a play called Jihad after two of his best friends from school that left Brussels and arrived to the battlefields of Syria and Iraq, became an ISIS members. And we had a great interview and we were talking, and then we were talking about anti-Semitism. We were talking about it, and this guy told me, you know that since I was born, since I remember myself, I know that the problem of Israel, of the Islam is Israel, is the Jews. Now, I've never met a Jewish guy in my life. I don't know where Israel is located on the map, but yet, that's what I know. And it's not only me, he told me, it's a whole generation of young Muslim people who were born here in Europe and believes in this way. Now, we're talking about kind of indoctrination. Look what I found. This is in Germany. While I made these reports, this is in Germany. Textbooks. Textbooks that are distributed there, of course, underground educational system. Its origin is from the Middle East, from Tunisia. And you could see all the motives of the old European anti-Semitism. You know, the Jews with the big noses, Israeli soldiers that are killing young, small Palestinian children, and so on, and so on, and so on. And it's there. And it's unbelievable that there are lots of young people who are learning from this. Of course, underground, but still, this phenomena is here, and it should be a problem for us. As part of these reports, I pretended as a Palestinian. I speak fluent Arabic, and I entered some, mosques, for instance. It was unbelievable, the incitement there. You couldn't believe, because there isn't any supervision of the country. I'm not sure that the country does know about these places. So what I've heard, they thought that I'm a Palestinian guy. I was told crazy things. The Jews, sons of the monkeys and the pigs. We didn't say it. The Quran or the Hadith said these things. People were talking about conquering Europe. I was talking to a guy in France, and he told me, last time we tried to conquer Europe was in 1683, during the siege over Vienna. We failed back then, but now we are doing this. And you hear these kind of things. So I was entering into the mosque of Amédi Coulibaly. Do you know him? He's the guy, the ISIS member, who made the terror attack in the Hyper-Cacher in France. So I entered into the mosque, pretended as a Palestinian. Just give you an example what I've heard.
السلام عليكم.
هي ثاني ديانة الإسلام. أوكي. فرنسا. ثاني ديانة الإسلام.
وبالمستقبل بدها تكون أول ديانة في فرنسا؟
خاطر الفرنسيين بزاف فرنسيين داخلين الإسلام. هم خايفين أولادهم داخلين الإسلام.
قل لي حسب رأيك فرنسا بدها تكون دولة مسلمين؟
الله أعلم. إن شاء الله. إن شاء الله. يجي النهار كل الأرض تكون مسلم. إن شاء الله.
كيف بدكم تسيطروا على فرنسا؟
والله لازم المسلمين إن شاء الله يتحدوا المسلمين. يتحدوا المسلمين في البلاد بتاع العرب.
Talking about anti-Semitism, it's not really, but lots of people in the Middle East, and I guess that not only in the Middle East, thinks that Israel, the Jews, are controlling the whole world. I'll give you an example. I have a good friend of mine from Hebron, Palestinian guy from Hebron, and his brother used to be a member of Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, which is a terror organization. A few years ago, Israel tried to assassinate him. He was injured quite badly. He lost his conscience. And whenever his conscience came back, so he told me that he was sleeping somewhere, and he heard Hebrew, women and men talking Hebrew. And then he opened his eyes. He was in the hospital. Then he opened his eyes, and he saw men and women wearing white dress. And he said to himself, oh my God, also in heaven, Jews are controlling the world. So the Jews among us, we have something to expect for. Everything is okay. I'm kidding, but it's a story that tells us, I think, much more about this thing. There's an attempt to make this distinguish between Zionism and Judaism, of course. I had the chance to make an interview with Ismail Haniyeh, number one of Hamas, the head of Hamas. I entered into Gaza Strip, to his house in a Shati refugee camp, and had this chance to talk to this guy. He's very important in Hamas, of course, as I said, number one. And after the interview was done, we were sitting in his saloon, and I was asking him as an Israeli citizen, not as a reporter, what do you say? What do you think is going to be the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? He didn't weep. He just looked at me and he told me, at the end of the day, we're going to conquer you. It's going to take, and I quote, 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years. We have time. Sabr wa sumud in Arabic, which means we have patience. Where do you come from? He asked me, and I said, I'm an Israeli. Your parents? Israelis. Grandmother, grandfather? Iraq, Morocco? Go back there. The golden age of the Jews was under the rule of Islam. Go back there. That's what he told me. And if I mention kind of anti-Semitism, so I really like to make interviews with children because you always get the pure view, no filters. So look, I had this interview with a young guy. Look what he told me.
انت مثلا تسمع عن عمليه طعن اللي صارت جوا شو ردود فعلك؟
أنا بفرح.
انت بتفرح؟ بتكيف ليش؟
عشان واحد من أهل يعني من فلسطين طعن اليهود. يعني إحنا علمنا اليهود يأخذ درس.
تعرف إنه أنا يهودي؟
لا.
أنا يهودي.
أنت يهودي؟
أنت حتكون فرحان إذا مثلا واحد طعني؟
Not really funny, but, you know. Last border, with your permission, the northern border. If you ask any source today in the IDF, in the Israeli Intelligence Directorate, they will tell you that this is the enemy par excellence of Israel. Israel is preparing itself, or the IDF is preparing itself to the third Lebanese war. Just recently I've heard that Hezbollah is known as the strongest non-state organization that exists today in the world. We're talking, just to give you some numbers, we're talking about during the Second Lebanese War, they had between 12 to 18,000 rockets and missiles. Today they've got, do you know? 130, exactly, 10 times missiles. I was talking to someone in the army that told me that they're expecting that the next third war with Lebanon, in the next war with Lebanon, the skyline of Israel, of Tel Aviv actually, is going to change out of these missiles. You know that once in a while we hear that someone bombed a convoy of ammunition that lives from Syria towards Lebanon. I think that we all know what's the reason for this. During the next war, the expectations in Israel is that we'll see these Hezbollah members trying to penetrate Israel and to conquer some inhabitants, some bases, military bases, and so on. Why is that? Because in this world, the symbols really matters. And if you see this yellow flag is waving over an Israeli base or inhabitant, it means one thing, a clear victory, and I think that this kind of thing we're going to expect to see. So it sounds quite frightening, to tell you the truth. ISIS and Hamas and Al-Qaeda, and let me surprise you. I think that Israel's position today is quite good. Actually, it's very good, because of two reasons. First, I think, as far as I understand, for the first time of the history of Israel, we don't have today any existential threat. We don't have it. There isn't any big Arab army that sits next to our border and just waiting for the opportunity to enter, to penetrate, and to conquer some cities. You don't have it. The other thing is maybe more interesting. It's something to do with the Arab Spring. Ladies and gentlemen, during dozens of years, the paradigm in the Middle East said that Israel is responsible for the inferiority, for the ignorance, for the poverty of the Middle East. If you remove Israel, everything is going to be great. This is what they were thinking. If you ask 380 million Arabs around us, I guess a few years ago, I guess that was their answer. But things are changed. And in front of our eyes, during the last few years, there's a big, huge conflict that raises. Its sources are in the 7th century, but today we feel it really good. Internal conflict in the Arab world. Do you know which conflict I'm talking about? Sunni and Shia, you know. Sunnis, 85% of the Muslim world. Shia, only 15%. The Shia is led by Iran. For years, there was a gatekeeper called Saddam Hussein, Iraq. Prevented Iran to increase its influence, to, you know, to send its, arms of the octopus towards the whole Middle East. But then Saddam Hussein fell down. And what we see these days is Iranians all around. Syria, Iraq, South Lebanon, Yemen. We see them all everywhere. And Israel, that used to be the problem, became part of the solution. Because today we have a common interest with, with the majority of the Middle East that is terrified out of Iran. What we see these days is a corridor that starts in Tehran and ends in northern Israel, South Lebanon. That's the point. And this Arab world, Sunni world, became to cooperate with Israel. Very intimate relationship, military, intelligence, and so on. And this is definitely very interesting. But I think that in order to become part of the Middle East, there's a small problem, really small, minor problem that we have to solve. It's called the Palestinians. We solved it, everything is going to be okay. In order to understand, as far as I understand, what happens today in the arena, the Palestinian arena, I want to take you in the time tunnel to 2006. 2006, there's December, actually, 2006, there's a serious attempt, actually this first serious attempt, to launch a rocket, not from Gaza Strip, but from the West Bank towards Israel. Who's responsible for this attempt is this guy. His name is Ashraf Saadi. He is the head of the Islamic Jihad. He used to be, the head of the Islamic Jihad in northern West Bank. He was climbing over the refugee camp of Jenin. He tried to launch this rocket towards Israel. I'm sure that the honorable audience here understands what does it mean. It means to paralyze Israel if the Palestinian has these rockets in the West Bank. He's Islamic Jihad member, actually the head of the Islamic Jihad. They never talk to Israelis, never. If you compare Islamic Jihad, so Hamas is like a Zionist organization. I'm not kidding. It's very, very, very extremist, very. I've never talked to Islamic Jihad before, and I applied to talk to him, and the day after he said, yes, come. So I came there to the refugee camp of Jenin, Palestinian place, very frightening place, that's to be honest. It was like a horror film, really. I was entering into this destroyed house, and there were two people that waited for me. This guy and his assistant, long beard, with his Kalashnikov, quiet, sitting aside. And I made this interview with this guy, very interesting interview. He told me how did he get the information to launch the rocket and to create the rocket and blah, blah, blah. And then he added at the end of the interview, next time I'm going to hit Afula. Afula is a northern city in Israel. So I'm going to manage to hit Afula. He didn't have the chance. He didn't have the chance at all. 2 months later, he was killed, assassinated by Israel. Now let's go 10 years later. 10 years later, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting in my house getting this phone call from unknown source. Salamu alaikum, alaikum salam. We start to talk. And whenever this guy tells me his name, I was also almost fainting, because he's the head of the Islamic Jihad today in northern West Bank. And then he started to speak Hebrew. And he asked me, great Hebrew he had, do you remember me? I told him no. We never met. Do you remember Ashraf Saadi? Yes. Do you remember his assistant? Yes. So it's me. And after 10 years, he became the head of the Islamic Jihad today. I didn't know that, but he's the guy. I asked him what's the reason for him to make this phone call, and he said, I invite you to Jenin refugee camp. Why? Surprise. You like surprises? I like. So I just wanted to go and, to do it. But then he added something which was a little bit problematic for me. He told me, you're going to see me there. I'm going to arrange everything. Don't approach me. Don't look at me. Don't whisper towards me. Don't do anything. And I was asking why. What's the reason? I mean, Jenin refugee camp is a place that without any background you cannot enter there. And he told me, because I have a reputation. I'm Islamic Jihad member. I cannot invite Israeli journalists, but I do it. So I promise you that you go alive out of this camp. That's what he told me. So I went to the camp, and I entered there, and what I see before is that this refugee camp, and there's a reason for me to tell this story, around it there was lots of masked armed men, and it appears to be Unit 101, the Palestinian Unit 101. It's the elite unit of the Palestinians, and it was established in order to fight the mortal enemy of the PA, of the Palestinian Authority. Do you know who is the mortal enemy? Hamas, exactly. Because the confrontation between Hamas and the PA, the Palestinian Authority, between Hamas and Mahmoud Abbas, is confrontation about the identity of the Palestinian future state. Is it going to be like Gaza, based or led by the Sharia laws, very religious, or is it going to be a secular country? And the hatred there is unbelievable. So outside there's the PA, and inside there's Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and one crazy, Israeli correspondent who enters. So I just want to show you a part of this report, and I think that it's very important for us to understand what happens today in the Palestinian arena. So let's see it and continue.
شو بتعملوا هون؟
بنفر بهالمخيم.
لكن هذا مش حقيقي مبين.
مش حقيقي.
لعبة أطفال؟ وإنتوا إيش؟ شو دوركم؟
مقاومة.
המטרה העיקרית היא שליטי המחנה בפועל שמפציעים משום מקום כמו רוחות רפאים. מה שאתם רואים זה כבר גז מדמיע שכוחות הרשות יורים לכיווננו. הידיים של חלק מהאנשים כאן גם מטענים מאולתרים. טוב, אפשר כבר לשמוע את הירי של כוחות הביטחון הפלסטינים שמתקרבים, נכנסים לכאן לפתח המחנה. כל הצעירים נמצאים שם, שומעים כאן ירי חי, אז אנחנו ברשותכם הולכים למצוא מחסה. אנחנו רצים למצוא מחסה בתוך סמטאות המחנה, אלא שדווקא שם, ללא התראה מוקדמת, אנחנו מוצאים את עצמנו בלב הקרב, ודווקא בצד של חמושי המחנה, אנשי פתח, לצידם, אנשי חמאס וג'יהאד איסלאמי. כן, אתם יכולים לראות את החמושים האלו, אנשי ג'יהאד איסלאמי מאחורינו. הרשות הפלסטינית נמצאת במרחק של משהו כמו 300-400 מטר. אפשר כבר לראות ממש כניסה למצב, לירי. יש כאן ממש מלחמה אמיתית על המחנה. ברגע זה אפשר לשמוע את קולות הירי. السلام عليكم. حرب حقيقي.
صحيح.
ايش في هسه؟
كان في معنا مهرجان لنصرة الأقصى. طبعا اتدخلوا هذول السلطة. احنا بنعتبر من اللحظة هاي انهم هذول شركاء مع الاحتلال.
Just normal day in the office, kind of. You know, when I went out of there, this guy who invited me made this phone call. He was laughing. He said, "I hope that you have a great report." And then he added, "I ask you, please, I beg you, erase everything. I don't want nor Israel nor the PA to identify my people because they will be caught." And a day later, I got this video in the WhatsApp from the guy, Islamic Jihad member, who was following me. And I saw 20 seconds of a movie, and I saw his house, and it was demolished, destroyed by the PA, by the Palestinian Authority. And what's the reason? Because he helped in Israeli entering and showing the world these pictures. What is the importance of this thing? In a way, two things. In a way, I think that it's like the book of George Orwell, 1984. Do you remember the room 101? It's the thing that you're most afraid of. And this is what Israel and the Palestinians mostly are really most afraid of. This vacuum, this chaos, anarchy. And we see these things today in some places in the Palestinian Authority. But if Mahmoud Abbas, 23 years old, the Palestinian leader, will pass away today or whatever, I think that what we've seen right now is going to be, there's a good chance that it's going to be the reality in the West Bank. If it happens there, maybe it's going to be the next intifada, we can call it, the next uprising, and we should really be worried about this chance. But it's more than this. Moreover, I think that in a way what we see today in the Palestinian arena is kind of Palestinian spring. You know, lots of people talking in the manners of democracy, freedom of speech. They really demand it, not only from Israel, but from the PA, from the Palestinian Authority. According to the last polls, 70% out of the Palestinians does not want to see Mahmoud Abbas in its position. And it's a problem. You're talking today of more than 100,000 Palestinians, graduates of universities, who are sitting at home, unemployed. This is the fuel for the next uprising. Really. You know, Mubarak, just think about it. Hosni Mubarak, he had 2 million people in his secret services in 2011. And within 1 month, he lost his position. Why? Because he lost the legitimacy, and I think that this is what happens these days in the Palestinian arena. And it's quite funny, you know, because there's lots of changes. And especially I think the media is playing a very important role. You know, whenever I entered here into this fight in Jenin refugee camp, one of the masked men approached me and he asked me in Hebrew, where can I see this report? One of these Islamic Jihad, you know, masked men. And I told him in Channel 2. When is it going to be broadcast? Tomorrow. There's a problem, he told me. What's the problem? We don't have Channel 2 in the camp. It was so funny. Really, fight, explosives, everything. And we're standing and thinking, how is he going to see this report? And then he told me, after a few seconds, he asked me, do you have a Facebook? I told him, of course. He took his Kalashnikov, he put it aside, he took out his iPhone, entered into the Facebook, gave it to me, and asked me to write my name. And then, what do you think he's done? Friend request. Islamic Jihad member, pure terrorist, asked me a friend request. And I don't know about you, but I did accept. I did accept whenever his rifle is in front of me. It's a funny story, but it tells us so many things about this era, this period of time. Really, everything is changing. I call it the privatization of terror. You know, once the terror, you didn't have any face. You didn't know anything about them. They were, you know, back there, after the walls. Today, they're friends of mine in the Facebook, Twitter. I follow them, they follow me. I know his friends, his girlfriends, what he likes, which kind of books he likes, everything. Craziness. That's what I think. And I think that one of the problems is the fact that really, I mean, in the two sides, the new generation does not know the other side. You know, when I'm entering these Palestinian territories, always, whenever I talk to people in my age or older, they know Hebrew. They have been to Israel. They know us directly. So they don't hate. Because whenever you know, you don't hate. But the new generation, in Israel and in the Palestinian side, he doesn't know the other side. He doesn't know his language. He's never been there. And you can feel this hatred. And there's a funny thing, not funny, but you know, always the prison became a place that even people who've done terrified crimes, they get to know you. I've done this report about a guy, 15 years old Palestinian guy, who stabbed a female Jewish girl to death. I try to understand his logic. What's the reason for him to do this? He never, as he said in his investigation, he never met an Israeli in his life. So I went to his house and I made a stand-up. Stand-up in the TV language means whenever you stand and talk into the camera, me. So it means I'm here. So I'm standing there making this stand-up, and then a vehicle, Palestinian vehicle, comes there with 4 people inside, and they all Hamas members. You can tell easily. The Hamas members, they look at me. I'm in the middle of Palestinian territory, no Israelis, kilometers out of there, and I'm standing, and they know me, of course, and they're waiting. So I'm entering my car, and I'm leaving, and then they're following me, and it's really, it's southern Hebron, it's no man's land. I was isolated. And then they stopped the car and prevented me getting on, and went out of the car and just stopped me and asked me to open the window. 4 Hamas members, frightening. I opened my window, and then one of them approached me with a smile and told me, Hemo is my family name, Hemo, I must do selfie with you. Really. What's the story? The story is that these 4 people, Hamas members, were jailed. They came out of jail, and in jail, what do you watch? Channel 2. And what do you read? Yediot Achronot or Haaretz. So you get to know Hebrew. And I must tell you that there are lots of Palestinian terrorists who today talk in a totally different language. It's unbelievable, really. It's a very unique phenomenon, I think. And I went there. They are from Bet Awa. Bet Awa is a village next to Hebron. Hamas, very strong Hamas base. I went there, I made this report. They entered me into a family of a guy, Palestinian guy, who sent suicide terrorists to kill 12 Israelis a few years ago. So I went there and I made very interesting interviews and report. And then 3 months ago, exactly 3 months ago, I entered into the jail, Israeli jail, to make discussion, just to talk with the Palestinian prisoners. And I was entered into the Hamas place, and I was talking to Hamas leaders, at least, each one of them, at least 30 life sentences, really. And then one of these Hamas members, he approached me, and he was standing like 20 minutes, it was 3 months ago exactly. He was standing like 20 centimeters next to me, and he told me, do you recognize me? In Hebrew. I said, no. He told me, look, you were in my house. You were drinking the water that my father gave you. You were eating the food that my mother prepared for you, and you called me a terrorist. And then he went. It was the guy that I've done the report in his house. Why do I tell you this story? Because it's an interesting story, and I think that in a way it shows you, I won't say the dilemmas, because I don't have any dilemmas. My identity is very clear. Israeli, Zionist, Jewish, everything is okay. But still, you're alone, and you're going to the other side, and you're making interviews or reports with the other side with all what does it mean. And believe me, every word that comes out of my mouth, the other side record it, knows it. So just interesting position. And just before we end and open it to Q&A, I tell you that I think about the current situation that there is a problem. I'm not sure that it's an innovation for you, but there is a problem, a real problem, because there isn't any negotiation between Israel and the PA because of lots of reasons. But whenever you don't have any talk, to this vacuum enters very dangerous trends, thinkings, like what? I'll give you an example. The BDS. You know the BDS, I guess. The BDS is something that is here in Europe or in the States, not in the Palestinian territories, never. But now, normalization, always it was a problem. Today, it's much more problem than it used to be. And we're talking about BDS. Ladies and gentlemen, I was not on the last, on the flotilla, not the last one before. Flotilla to Gaza. Only Israeli that went on the flotilla to Gaza. It was very funny story, not funny, but strange story, I'll tell you. I got this phone call from someone that I know. He told me, if you want to go to the flotilla, you have to get today to Crete. So I went to Crete, to Heraklion, and then he told me, you have to go to this place, to this hotel, go down to the lobby tomorrow morning and they're going to expect you. So I went there. And I saw a guy in the lobby that definitely is not from Crete, from the Middle East, one with long beard and everything. I approached him in the morning. I told him who I am. And then this guy, he heard that I'm an Israeli. He said, "Ba'tadhir minnak." In Arabic, it means I don't want to talk to you, and went. By the way, he has only one hand. And then he came back after a few minutes, and he told me, "Okay, checked out, everything is okay with you. Salamu alaikum." And then he told me his name, and I said, "Okay, nice to meet you." And he told me, "Don't you recognize me? Don't you know me? Please make Google." And went, "Do Google." So I Googled him, and I found out that this guy that I'm standing to is the biggest fundraiser of Hamas in Europe. And this guy is one of the organizators of the flotilla. Everything to do together. And then a few days later, 2 days later, I went on this boat towards Gaza. 18 people were on this boat. Lots of them are BDS activists, mostly from Sweden. I must tell you, I reached on this boat in 2 o'clock in the morning. 3 o'clock in the morning, I understood that if I want to get alive out of this flotilla, I shouldn't talk to anyone. Why? Because what I found out is a real pure anti-Semitism. Really. They didn't talk about, 67 borders, 48 borders, settlements. No. Israel does not have the right to exist. Israel is a colonialist project that should be erased out of the map. This is the language. That's what we're talking about. So we're talking about BDS that enters into the Palestinian arena. We're talking about one-state solution supporters. A lot of Palestinians today tells me, everywhere, cities, refugee camps, they tell me, "We want to live like you. No more fences. Let's live together in one state. From the river to the sea, one state. Everything's going to be peaceful, beautiful." This is the nightmare of the Zionism, because it means that the Jews are going to be minority in Israel. And I think that in a way, it's for us a very important thing to talk, to create this discourse, and to continue on. Thank you very much, and I open it for questions. Thank you. Do we have time, Ulf?
So I just want to thank you. I'm get a little worried now. I was happy when we managed to get you here, but now I hear which friends you have, so I'm not so sure. We fundraise for Israel, and you made fundraisers for something else. So thanks for being here. But I wasn't aware, but okay. So Eva has a microphone. Yes, so we have a question.
Thank you. I think it was very interesting. I'm also getting worried. If I add you on Facebook, I will have like common friends with half of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Anyway, thank you very much. I think it was very interesting. And you mentioned towards the end Sweden and the Swedish involvement. I think many of us here are very interested in your views. So, as of course you know, in 2014, Sweden recognized Palestine. And now, past about 3.5 years, can you see any effects on the conflicts, on the situation in the Palestinian Authority of the Swedish recognition?
To tell you the truth, no. No. It's like two parallel lines, let's call it like this. I think that in a way, if you look today about the Palestinian ideology, what are you going to do? So you've got two ways of thinking. One is the muqawama. Muqawama is struggle in Arabic, and it's Hamas way. Okay, we're going to free Palestine through struggle. Failed. The other one is the mufawadat, which means masawmatan, negotiation, of course, negotiation. And it failed as well. After 25 years of talking, the Palestinian says, we don't have any horizon. The situation is as bad as it used to be. So I think that in a way, the third path today, as we see, is a kind of uprising, diplomatic uprising. This is what Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, is trying to do. Okay, I'm going to undermine the Israeli legitimacy, out there in the diplomatic way. But it fails as well. So you've got the UN and you've got, all of these organizations, but on the ground, I think that you don't really feel the effect of the foreign policy, European foreign policy, and so on. Please.
Toda for your story.
Thank you very
It was
much.
very interesting. I have one question. It is very simple. How do the Palestinians get their weapons, and how do they get there to the territories when you've been on? Thank you.
How do I get there?
No, how the weapons travel,
Yeah.
the route. Thank you.
Yeah, whatever, that's right. We are Marxist. Wherever you get money, you can do anything. They have money. Some of the money comes from abroad. We're talking about Iran, for instance, really helps Hamas and Islamic Jihad. You're talking about lots of sources of fundraising. Actually, to tell you the truth, most of the weapons are stolen from Israeli military bases. Yeah, wherever there are crimes, so you can find people, human, and most of the rifles arrive from Israeli bases, military bases. This is the truth. But you don't find anything but rivals in the West Bank. So, in Gaza, by the way, it's a totally different thing. I didn't speak about Gaza a lot, or at all, to tell the truth. But Gaza is a really problematic place because at the end of the day, the war. I mean, okay, let's say something about Gaza. Hamas is trying to do anything, as far as I understand, in order to avoid war. But he's trying to do everything in order to prepare himself to the next war with Israel. So if we're talking about weapons, smuggling from the smuggled tunnels, of course, under the border between Sinai and Gaza. Until 2013, there were over 1,200 tunnels like this. And the economics of Gaza were based on these tunnels. But then Sisi shut down it. And now there isn't any shortage in Gaza, but people does not have money to buy things. Everything enters it through Kerem Shalom. Kerem Shalom is it's between the border between Israel and the Palestinians. But now people does not have money. So that's the problem of Gaza. We're talking today about a place that in 2020, no drinking water. We're talking about a place that electricity, for instance, they've got between 4 to 6 hours a day. That's it. Not because of Israel's fault, by the way, because the PA does not pay the money for this electricity. You're talking about 47% of unemployment in Gaza. And I think that the great ambition of every Gazan people is just to escape out of the strip. Please.
My question is, where do you get the courage from?
Some would say courage, some would say stupidity. You can choose. It's a good question. Let me be honest for a moment. Since I became, no, I wasn't honest until now, but since, it's kind of a personal thing. Since I became a father, it was 5 years ago, I lost my courage, believe me. I mean, this is after I lost my courage, what you've seen right here. It is frightening. It is frightening. In the dictionary of the struggle between the Israel and the Palestinians, so they never hit any Israel correspondent until today. But even this, I think, it's changing in front of our eyes. Why? Because lots of voices against normalization, for instance. To see Israeli from Channel 2 talking in Hebrew in this kind of situation. A week ago, I've been to Balata refugee camp, very frightening place. There were like hundreds of Kalashnikov next to me, and there was a prisoner who was released out of the jail. And I'm speaking Hebrew inside this place. No Israelis never enters there. It was frightening, to tell you the truth. But this is my job. This is my duty. I think that in a way, my job is to remind the Israelis that there are 4 million Palestinians who's waiting in the West Bank and in Gaza and waiting for, we have to solve the problem. It doesn't matter if you're right wing or left wing, but we have to solve it. And my duty is to remind the Israelis that we have still this kind of problem. Please.
What is the attitude of the Israeli Arabs? Can you tell us something about the trends and attitudes?
Definitely. The Israeli Arabs, we're talking about 1.4 million approximately, good citizens, really, mostly they're good citizens. I mean, I would say that there are few dozens of people who joined ISIS, that's it, few dozens, not more. I would say that 99% of the Israeli Arabs are, I won't say 99%, but the majority of the Israeli Arabs are really, I think, believe with getting involved in the Israeli society. The number of children that they're bringing is reduced as long as more people are, and especially more women are entering into the educational system and jobs and everything. So the Israelization, I think it's much more dramatic than the Palestinization. Okay, you've got these two kinds of lines. So I hope that I replied.
A question. You described very good imagery, the tension between the intellectual democratic Palestinians, the violent jihadists, and the establishment of PLO, the triangle. And they're waiting. But we saw from the Arab Spring what happened when the vacuum came and the rise of ISIS and so on. Can Israel influence this? How can we avoid a new vacuum? Because we know violence wins in the end. So how can we strengthen that? And can Israel strengthen it? Is Israel a power?
You're talking about the Palestinians, right? Yeah. I think that in a way, we have a luck that there is this Arab Spring. Why? What's the reason? Because the Palestinians, they look on the right and they see Syria. They look at the left and they see Iraq or Yemen. And I think that mostly they're afraid of getting to these places. So there is a problem because the agenda of the Arab world forgot the Palestinians. A few years ago, every news were opened by the Palestinian things. Today, everyone forgot them, to tell you the truth. But I do believe that also in the other side, they understand the meaning of uprising like this. And it's interesting because we're talking about more than 15 years after the second Intifada, the second uprising, and still today, most of the Palestinian, I think, as far as I understand, does not support any struggle like this. Suicide bombers, they stopped. Why? Only because of the IDF? No, I believe no. Because they understand what they're going to lose if they're going to continue this. So there is a vacuum. There are lots of risks talking about this vacuum, but in a way I think that the Arab Spring made the Palestinians understand what they can lose if they join it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Really hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.